me get my, I was going to do my hair for you, and then it just didn't happen
I,
today.
w I was gonna wash mine too, and I was like, you know what? It's another bun day.
It's another bun day. That's
It's
fine.
another bun day.
I was also going to wear red too, and I see that you're wearing red in
Well,
honor.
I did pick that. I was actually in a tank top before, and I was like, God, I
Yeah,
always do these recordings in a tank top, and if I get cold, I have this stupid throw I put over it, and I always just feel like I look like a slob. So I'm just like, I'll put like literally, I'm gonna take this off as soon as this is done and hang it back up so it doesn't get too dirty.
I love that. No, that's so great because we're talking about the red mother. I did put red
Mhm.
lips on for the red mother. Okay, so there's
Gorgeous,
that. Yeah, I figured it would
gorgeous.
fit. So, all right, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that Marshall is joining me today. We're going to have a really juicy, delicious conversation about ancient grimoires versus modern grimoires. We're going to talk about The Red Mother, which is the follow up book to Cunning Words that Marshall just published. I'm so excited to dive into it because it is very much a modern grimoire that has a lot of innovative concepts that I've seen. You've woven in a lot of ancient grimoire work into this modern grimoire, but really put a fresh face on it, weaving in a little bit of narrative and a little bit of chaos magic and all of the juicy,
Mhm.
delicious things. So, we're going to talk about his book. But first, just for anybody that does not know Marshall, so we've collaborated a couple times at this point. It's
Oh
been a few
yeah.
times like on my channel, I went on your podcast, and every time I have you on my channel, everyone loves you, adores you so, so much. But for people that don't know you, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Marshall, WSL, or known as Witch of Southern Light online. I'm a Texas-based queer witch. I practice a version of traditional witchcraft or folkloric witchcraft. I just published my second book, like you said, The Red Mother, which is the follow-up to Cunning Words, a grimoire of tales and magic. A lot of my work really focuses on the concept of the narrative, the story. The history of the bardic tradition is a beautiful way of sharing information, story, feelings, passion through time, and we see that in the way that these stories are written and the way that it teaches acts of magic, witchcraft, real practical magic that can be used with just a touch of whimsy. So I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to be back. It's like we're our own coven too now.
Yes, exactly. I love this universe that you're building and with
Thank
Cunning
you.
Words, because I had you on this channel to talk about Cunning Words, the
Hmm.
very first book in this
Yeah.
series. Can I call it a series?
Yeah,
Is
a
that right?
collection.
Collection. Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably the appropriate word. But I read Cunning Words and just fell in love with it because if you think about all the mysticism and magic of folkloric traditional witchcraft and how
Hmm.
alluring it is and how it just feels like it transitions you to a different time and space, that's how I felt when I read Cunning Words for the first time. It was so beautifully written. And going into The Red Mother, your second book now, which I'll have it linked down somewhere so people can, see the cover of it and whatnot. But it's I mean,
I have
you've
the
done it
hardcover right
again.
here.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen the hardcover yet because I have the ebook. So, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. Can you show some of the illustrations really quick?
Absolutely.
The-
So the first page, when you open it up, you get this nice little opening, which has some of the very specific symbols that, of course, if you look closely, are also on the sigil, but they're combined together. The title page, which I just love as well, um, it really
Yeah,
shows this very transcendent Lorik witch flying in her shroud.
yeah.
Uh, it's these illustrations have been, I will say my artwork has really evolved in time with the Red Mother because I've been so deeply inspired by like woodcuts and the use of woodcut prints throughout the centuries to depict what we believed witches did. And they always give me just this sense of power and of I don't want to say ancient authority because they were a depiction by non-witches about what they believed witches did, right? The thing is we witches took that the same way we take a lot of these things that have been bastardized. We have taken things that have been we've accused of and said, "Well, I wasn't, but now I will." And I think that's actually a really beautiful thing. You know, I'm gay. I identify as queer. Queer is a word we have reclaimed. Yes, at one point it is a slur, and of course, still some people might use it as a slur. The thing is, I am and I take it back. And I do think that there's power in building that, not only with my queerness, but in my witchcraft, in my art.
And you illustrated this book too by yourself.
Hmm.
You
I
not only
did.
published this by yourself, which is really
Hmm.
hard to do. You wrote
Thank
it, you
you.
published it, you illustrated it. It is beautiful. And I was noticing on the topic of, ancient grimoires that we'll be talking about later on, you have a lot of influences from like Agrippa's three books of occult philosophy. I
Hmm.
saw the Black Pullet. For anybody who doesn't know, the Black Pullet is a French grimoire that weaves in this literary element with the magic. And so I saw influences of that. I saw Nigel Pearson in there. I saw Gemma Gary's Black Toad in there. There were
Oh
so
yeah.
things from like just these old ancient grimoires that we have that are so revered in the occult community. You are weaving in all of those elements, but really putting in a totally fresh lens on it. So, just to give everyone a good foundation here, maybe if they haven't read Cunning Words yet, because I
Hmm.
do think these books need to be read in order, can you give a recap of who the Red Mother, Green Mother, and Black Mothers are and kind of what they represent just from your first book? And then we can go into the Red Mother a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first book, Cunning Words, it did introduce, there's three different stories. Our Mother in Red, Our Mother in Green, and Our Mother in Black. And they were inspired by Gemma Gary's The Black Toad, which she used an organizational skill called, where the three chapters were broken down with Old Mother Redcap, which teaches, charms, acts of magic, weaving charms, weaving spells, sigils, things like that, that were actually historically documented throughout the West Country of England. And then Old Mother Greencap was a chapter that was all about trees, plants, roots. It was all about the magic, majoritively of healing and of medicinal work, but also the magic of plants itself. And then the last one was Old Mother Blackcap, which was curses, hexes, and bindings. And these were as an organizational tool, I just thought it was such a beautiful thing, but I was so inspired by these depictions of an archetype that covers this collection of types of magic. I felt like there was a story there. There were more stories there. And so that's what inspired Our Mother in Red, Our Mother in Green, Our Mother in Black. And then, of course, now I feel as soon as I finished writing Cutting Words, I didn't stop. I continued writing, and I was so entranced by this Red Mother, this character, this being. Um, Her spirit seemed to call to me in a way that I felt like she was pushing me to write more, to give more. And she let me know when I was wrong. Like she let me know that's not it. That's not the right one. Because there were multiple stories that never made into this book that either weren't finished or were created and said, no, this is not for this. And I could feel it. I knew it. And that was so clear to me. And I knew it. I do see her not necessarily like as an egregore that's been created, but as more of a historical inspirer of magic. In the introduction, I call her the Lorik Witch of the Woods. Um, I do think that there is this absolute horrifying beauty in that otherness that lies in the woods. Historically, a lot of times when a cunning person would talk about the evil witch who's cast a hex on you, it may not actually be referring to another communal member, but more of that monster, that creature, that fictional witch with an agenda. And I wanted to bring life to that. I wanted to bring in it. I was so inspired by it. And so that's why I wanted to dive first headlong into the Red Mother. She's the weaver, the twister of charms, the writer of spells, the conjurer of spirits. Somewhat separately from plant-based magic. She does get into baneful magic as well, but
Yeah.
I mean, Kurt, charms, threads, magic itself. That's not necessarily her complete forte, but that's part of her collective, if you will.
Hmm. Yeah, you introduced in Cunning Words, you introduced this whole multiverse. I don't know if I should call it a multiverse, but you know what I mean. This whole universe of these
Yeah.
entities that you can work with. And there's for those that haven't read Cunning Words, there's more than just the Red Mother, the Black Mother, and the Green
Yes.
Mother. There are
It's
so many more
it's
characters,
it's
but
a really beautiful network of stories that you
yeah.
don't realize are as connected until you continue reading through, and they all kind of circle back around and connect with each other.
Yes. Yeah, you'll see certain characters show up. There's a brief mention of characters from previous chapters in other
Hmm.
stories that aren't necessarily theirs. And it's really cool to see like a one line of, oh, a little bird. I remember a little bird. Or, just like these characters kind of floating in and
Hmm.
out and they're all connected. And I thought that was really beautiful. And so this book, The Red Mother, obviously deep dives into this entity in particular. And
Hmm.
I wanted to talk about the Red Mother a little bit more because the Red
Yeah.
Mother's name is Belinda in the book. And so, do
Yes.
you want to elaborate on that a little bit, give more context about her?
You know, it's very interesting because when I chose the name Belinda, when I first started writing it, it was something that just sort of fit the character, but I do want the readers to understand that her name, Belinda, isn't actually as important as her title of the Red Mother. Her title is her power. Her her identity as the Red Mother is the spirit, the egregore, the archetype that we're calling upon, that we're being inspired by, that's teaching us her magic. And so it's interesting when you think about the history of gods and goddesses and deities with their names, and sometimes they're nameless ones, and sometimes they have names, but maybe the name and the story isn't as important as the title they carry. You know, I'm not sure if you've ever read, uh, I hate to bring this book up because of the author, but
Mm.
she's gone and dead, so she's not going to benefit from it. But like Mists of Avalon, he has Vivienne as the Lady of the Lake. The
Oh, I
thing
have
is,
not.
is
I know of it.
yeah, exactly. But the thing is Vivienne as a name isn't as important as her title as the Lady of the Lake. And that's a very similar aspect here. And I want people to know that. So when they read this book, if they're wanting to work with the spirit of the Red Mother, be inspired by, let her be your mentor. Her title is her identity, the Red Mother, the Red Witch, the Red Sorceress. She is the one who is bestowing this information, who's sharing it with you, who's giving you that mentorship. Um, it's not that I could have chosen any name because I do think Belinda just fits her so beautifully.
I do too.
And I do feel very similarly with, which is funny because I did name the Green Mother Vivienne. And
Ah, I love that.
but it is really their title that's their archetype that is their their true bestowal of identity and spirit and inspiritedness, if that makes sense.
It does, and it just shows her transition too, because as I was reading the stories of Belinda, she transforms from just a girl to the Red
Hmm.
Mother. And Belinda was
Yes.
almost like her just a girl phase, just a girl trying to get out of a bad marriage. And I'm not going to spoil the stories, of course, but it was really cool to see. She was just a normal person in the beginning,
Yeah.
just a very normal person, and then she transcended. She had this spiritual growth and became the Red Mother. So
And
it's
you know, that's actually it's a very common journey of the witch. We find ourselves in these traumatic and unescapable situations that we don't, no mundane solution is going to help us anymore. And we find ourselves turning to magic, turning to witchcraft,
yeah,
turning to spirit conjure. We find ourselves not necessarily going to that dark place, but to that other place, that forbidden, that unnamed place. And she did that. She showed that journey. I mean, the book really is about her journey into her power. And I think we, as witches, as magical practitioners, are spending a lifelong journey into finding, discovering, and wielding our power.
it's so true. I definitely resonate with that. And your stories too have a lot of, I mean, some of them are really heavy in a good way.
Hmm.
And there's a theme of desperation in these stories. There's queerness in these stories. There's just growth and spiritual evolution. So I wanted to ask you, when you were writing this story or these
Hmm.
stories of these characters, do you relate them back to your personal life? And how does your personal practice kind of reflect some of the desperation of these stories you've written?
No, absolutely. You know, in the book, I have author's notes at the end of certain stories, and these author's notes give an extra added context to where these stories were inspired by, different aspects of my life, my experience, a queer man living in Texas. Um, there is a lot of oppression going on in different places all around the world, obviously, but I have experienced different aspects of depression, especially when it comes to my queerness, my gender fluidity, my ability to the stories come from a place where I am seeking answers to certain traumas and frustrations, and I funnel that into my craft in a very, very artistic way. I've done some magic in the past that I don't want to talk too much about, but I will say it's definitely influenced my craft. So like there is a story called the Robin and the Snake, and that one was deeply inspired by I was writing it at the exact same time that several states, including my own, were trying to pass legislation that would take trans and non-binary minors away from their supportive parents. And during this time when a drag ban was going on, we were seeing this attack against the queer supportive family. And that's what that story ended up being about. And that's what that magic was inspired by, was this experience of seeing this attack, this oppression, this propaganda about the queer family unit. And in the end, of course, I won't ruin what happens, but I will say you do end up getting to see the beauty of what happens when you allow the queer family to be free and express themselves. Um, it's a short story. It's actually a very simple one, but the thing is the emotion and passion that went into it and comes out of it left behind something in me that sticks with me. And that one's a really interesting one because it's a very read between the lines piece of magic. And some people may understand that, and some people may not necessarily identify with, but I do hope that you feel something from it. A lot of these stories are, like you said, they're heavy. And they inspire deep emotion. There's a story about a beautiful but clandestine sapphic romance that that kind of actually crosses several taboos. There's some differences in age, there's some differences in station, there's some differences in one out, one in. Um, it created some dire circumstances for many of us in the past and in the present and possibly the future. And we get to see acts of magic throughout those experiences and hard lessons that sometimes we have to learn by going through them.
Yeah.
And I've been through those hard lessons. I've been through those relationship lessons. And I really wanted to put voice to that into these stories.
I think you did such a good job with that. There were so many times when I was reading the book and it brought me to tears. Like I could really feel myself getting teary-eyed. There was one story in particular, I'm not going to spoil it, but there was one that I really related to, and I
Hmm.
just had to stop reading for a second and just lay on my couch because there's, even though these stories are short, and I guess on a superficial level you could say that they're, a quick read, but really I think it's something that somebody needs to go back to time and time again to really get the deeper meaning. And I think the word for me is deliverance. That's the appropriate word for me when I read your stories, is like all of these characters are going through some sort of desperation, yes, but there is deliverance usually at the end.
Yes.
And it just resonated so deeply with me. I think a lot of people will. So,
Thank you. I think that's a really, deliverance is a beautiful word to describe it. I feel like so many of us, especially as witches and magical practitioners, are searching for that experience that inspires us.
Mhm.
There are experiences we have when it comes to our own personal gnosis and acts of magic and ritual. But then there are also pieces of literature that when we read them, we take them in and we come out feeling transcendent. We feel like we've changed because we've experienced this literature. And I feel changed from writing it. I feel changed when I reread it. I walk away from it now. And actually, I did an interview in the past where I talked about how I jumped directly from Cunning Words into writing this. And I'm taking some time right now to kind of swim in the Red Mother pool because I do feel like there's still something here I'm working through. I'm, I'm taking in, I'm still being mentored by the magic within this. And I want to take my time with it. And I do feel like coming out the other side, something within me has somewhat changed. And in fact, there's a line in one of the poems where it talks about having that meeting with the crossroads spirit, learning about the powers that be, and walking away, not only being changed, but completely rearranged. And I think that that is a very, very powerful tool that witches experience, that deep thing inside of us that shifts, where we start seeing the world differently, where we start having ideas and experiences and moments of gnosis throughout our lives that we didn't have before we had that experience.
You touched on something that I wanted to ask you
Mhm.
about your evolution in your understanding of these entities, because when you wrote Cunning Words, I'm sure you already had an idea of the future books that you would write with the Red Mother, Green Mother, Black Mother,
I
etc.
didn't.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, so talk
When
about
I
the
wrote the book,
evolution.
I had no idea there was going to be more. I
Really?
literally,
Okay.
I had no idea, but as soon as I finished, I just knew I wasn't done.
Yeah.
And I just kept going. And the evolution of it has been really, really amazing because I have started kind of slightly working on the next one in the collection, but I'm really taking my time because There's a difference between this book and the first book. And I think when you read it all the
Yes.
way through, you can see there are differences and not only the way some of these stories are being delivered, but the type of magic it's sharing. The first one's kind of like, in my opinion, it's kind of like an introductory.
Yes. Yes.
It's giving you a way to build a practice with this. This one is 102. It's taking you down a very more specific path. And the next one is going to be, 102.5 or 103. I'm not sure how all these got in go to college. But the next one kind of takes it into a different place.
Mm.
And the next one will too take it into a different place. And I'm noticing the evolution of this as it's affecting me. It can sometimes change my mood. It can sometimes change the way that I'm experiencing my own magic. I've done some of the celestial work in this book, and I notice the way that I feel during it isn't like I have felt in the past doing certain spell work. Um, the evolution of my writing obviously is slightly changing, but the evolution of my craft is expanding as well. And I'm finding that it's not just getting bigger, I'm adding to it, but I'm honing in on certain aspects. I'm honing in on thread work. I'm honing in on spirit conjure. I'm honing in on very specific acts of written charms because with like the red inscriptions. And there are definitely ways and modalities of magic in here that really focus on a specific set of magical skills.
hmm I noticed with this book, The Red Mother, it
Hmm.
feels even more like a grimoire than Cunning Words did. Because you're right, Cunning Words was very much an introduction of these stories and workings that you can do with this world that you have really built upon and created. But The Red Mother, I mean, especially because I see elements of Solomonic magic in it with the spirits and the seals at the end. I
Hmm.
see inspiration from Austin Osman Spare, Alphabet of Desire, because you had this section where you're changing letters into certain symbols and then you're creating these beautiful sigils, and the whole thing itself is a hyper sigil, I could say, for your own life. So
Oh
there's
yeah.
just, yeah, there's a lot of applications where I feel like this is so much more grimoire than the first one. And I'm really, really excited for people to read it. And
Thank you.
yeah, so that's what sparked this whole conversation. So to kind of bridge into ancient grimoires versus modern, because
Let's do it.
the reason why this conversation came up for people watching this, I messaged Marshall and I said, your book is better than a lot of the grimoires that I've read. I'm sorry, I'm not a grimoire expert. Obviously, I've never been a traditional ceremonial magician. I tried to be for 2 seconds 10 years ago. It didn't work out, but I have dabbled here and there. And from my limited perspective, at least, reading yours. Not only is it so much more accessible and inclusive, but it weaves in a lot of different traditions. It adds context, it adds flavor, it's inspiring, it's emotional. There's so much in this book. I feel like a super fan, and I don't understand. This is going to be the context for the conversation we're about to have. I don't understand the obsession with ancient old grimoires. I think that people take the idea of mystery and think that just because something's mysterious, it automatically makes it more powerful. And I get that, especially for thinking about egregoric beings. People that have
Mhm.
worked with these ancient grimoires over time and space have really kind of fed their energy into it. So, in that way, I could see an ancient grimoire perhaps being a lot more powerful than modern grimoires. But I really do feel like modern grimoires are so overlooked. And we don't even see a lot of modern grimoires coming out, and yours is so unique. And so that's what sparked this conversation for everyone watching. I messaged Marshall and I said, um, yours is better than a lot of the grimoires that I've read. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more. So if we're talking about just accessibility, and it's not just accessibility that obviously makes a great grimoire, but yours is very accessible. I'm thinking of, the Greek magical papyri, where it's some of those rituals are completely inaccessible. The ingredients you need to do those rituals, and even, talking about other books like the Picatrix and such.
Mhm.
So I wanted to talk about yours in particular. When you were writing this grimoire, The Red Mother, how did you balance staying true to the traditional roots that you were kind of weaving in, as well as adding folkloric witchcraft while creating something that really does resonate with today's witches? Did you have like a hard time walking that line? And how did you face any challenges in balancing your historical inspiration with modern practicality?
So first off, I think it really comes down to me and my identity as a witch.
Hmm.
I'm a witch. I practice
Hmm.
witchcraft. I don't practice ceremonial magic. I think you can do both. So there are witches out here who can do both, but that's not my forte. And the thing is I studied the Key of Solomon. I've studied the Lesser Key. I've studied the Black Bullet. I've studied the Red Dragon. I've studied parts of the Picatrix. I've studied big sections of the three and fourth book of occult philosophy. And the thing is many of those historical books come from a time of its own context. Let me rephrase. It comes from a time period where there were different types of political context that went into why it was written the way it was at the time. So
Yes.
when you look at like the Keys of Solomon, the Greater and Lesser Key of Solomon, it is it is a Christianized, and almost I should say a Christian perspective on bastardized Jewish magic. So an appropriated bastardized Jewish magic. So for
1000%.
me, when I look at a lot of these workings, I'm very inspired by the sigils. I'm very inspired by the seals. I'm inspired by the Goetic demons. But many of them involve supplicating myself to a God I don't worship.
Mm,
Many of them involve hours of deep ceremonial magic, of cleansing, of tools that I'm not going to create and aren't part of my lexicon. They're not part of my craft. And because I identify as a witch and I practice witchcraft, I wanted to create and work with a grimoire that was clearly witchcraft. And so when I wrote this, being inspired by all of these things that have helped build up my knowledge of the craft of occultism, I wanted to put something out in the world that witches could see and identify with as clearly witchcraft, as part of their practice, as something that they could build into their own workings of spirit conjure. Um, I don't have 10,000 knives and a sword. I have a cauldron. I have salt. I got dirt. I have herbs and plants at my fingertips. I have alcohol. I have fire. I have those things that I can create. And that's really what started to come together when it came to building acts of spirit conjuration in here. Now, you brought up the fact in the back there is a full grimoire that can be used with all the spells extracted from the stories, and then some. There is a collection of spirits that have been weaved together from multiple sources, and there's a chapter in that explains why and how they're weaved together, where they came from. But they're seals that you, as a witch, can work with and conjure as an act of magic in your cauldron. There is it's actually a very simple ritual that kind of changes slightly depending on the spirit you're conjuring and what you're going to do with it. There are symbols that are used that do not connect back to any sort of dogmatic religiosity or churchianity in any sort of way, that don't involve you supplicating yourself to a dogmatic God. That's not for me. If it's for you, if you're watching this and that is part of your practice, I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy for you. I love that for you. It's not for me. And I know there are a lot of other witches that it's not for too. I think we can have our cake and eat it too if we know how and we put something out in the world that is eatable cake. You know,
yes.
like that was really, really important to me. And so when you read about some of these conjurations, and actually there's a great little passage in the back that is kind of the introduction to the conjuring rite. And
Mhm.
and I loved it because it was so important to me. It's called this section called the bestowal.
Mm.
And it's actually it's very short. I can share it
Read
with you
it.
guys if you want.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's called the bestowal. It's an introduction to a craft and spirit conjure. And the man in black said, "Gather round, I have lessons to share, so carefully lend me your ear. Spirits abound from all around, at your call they can appear. I give you 13 conjurations, spirits to call to your aid. To curse or bless, you may possess their power called forth to be made. Read out the rhyme and verse, the Red Mother will show you the way, the tools that are needed, magic to be seated. Just heed the words I say." And then it continues to go into the actual, it's actually a beautiful literary. And of course, in the color copy, it's written in red because
Yeah.
those are the Red Mother's actions that teach the story about how she goes to create these, conjure and create these spirits. And then it gets into the nature of spirits, it gets into the actual conjuring act. And then, of course, you get all the beautiful seals and sigils in the back that
I
have
was
been
just going to ask you to
created.
show them. Yeah, if you want to do a little flip through, that would be, yeah, because I don't have the color version. So it's beautiful.
And they are very specific, like those sigils are their names. They are used to conjure very specific types of magic, whether that be protection, good fortune, wrath, uh, misfortune. I mean, courage, justice, problem solving. That was actually one of my favorite ones, the spirit of solutionism.
Yeah.
That one is one that I found really, really fascinating because a lot of us sometimes have the need for a problem solver. And it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily fall under one specific category. And I think that that's a really, really beautiful, it's not like a one-stop shop, but it's a really beautiful way of recognizing a type of spirit conjure that helps you. I've got a problem. I need a solution for this. I'm going to conjure the spirit to help me solve this problem.
I wanted to put you on the spot, not to make you feel uncomfortable. No,
Do
I
it.
want to put you on
Do
the
it.
on the spot. What is your favorite working in this book? I didn't prep you for this at all, so I know that's probably going to be
Mm.
really hard to decide. But if you could share, maybe just one working from the book, I think people would
Hmm.
really appreciate that.
So one of my favorite workings is the witch's cord and the nine knot spell.
Oh, I love that
So
one. Yeah.
this one was a really, really personal story for me in the first place because it was a coming out story. And it was a story. Actually, I haven't said this before. The name of the character was actually named after my father's middle name.
Oh,
And me and my views that are a little bit separate, but there was something where it was an act of personal healing to include my father in this, um, because it gave me the opportunity to reconcile something that maybe we may not be able to reconcile in person. Now I get to reconcile it in my writing.
wow.
And the witch's nine knot spell, which most people may know the original one. It's been around for several centuries. By knot of one, the spell's begun. By knot of two, the spell be true. And there are these nine knots. And of course, we've seen it in a lot of entertainment as well. We saw it in the Discovery of Witches, which definitely takes it to a fantastical level. But a lot of times I think that people will read this and it kind of makes you go, I love this beautiful poetry and the nine knots, but how does it work and what do I do with it?
Right.
Like, what is it for? What
Right.
kind of spell am I making? How do I put the specific intention into it? And people have confused it somewhat with the witch's ladder, or it has been not necessarily confused, but it has been interchangeable sometimes with the terms the witch's ladder, which has historically also been something else. But the way that things get meshed together through time is a fascinating story that we can talk about another day. But
Yes.
I wanted to take something historical and make it more close to my practice. So the act of creating a permanent witch's cord that I can use and unknot and use again as part of my practice was something that was very powerful to me. And I took this witch's nine knot spell and I created a very specific design in how you start it by waking it up, how you use specific words to invoke each knot, because each one involves something very specific in the way that it opens certain parts of there it is. So it has nine knots, the knot of opening, the knot of summoning, the knot of the gloam. And for people who don't know, the gloam is another word for twilight, that in-between time period. The knot of spinning, the knot of desire, the knot of weaving, the knot of contingency, which I do want to get onto because that one's really important.
Yes.
The knot of alignment and the knot of fate. And each one of these has a very specific thing. So, like the first knot, I won't go into all of them, but like the first one is by knot of one, I slip into the crossroads and open the gates to the other world. Tighten the knot. That's the purpose of it, is I am opening this gate. By knot of two, hear me, spirits of above and below, spirits of east, spirits of south, spirits of west and north. Tighten the knot. And then you go, and then it goes into this actual mechanism of opening these gates into a magical in-between space to grab those threads of fate, reweave them with your specific desire. Because, and the fifth knot is by knot of five, I speak my will, therefore it is. And then you say this reasonable desire into the hole of the knot and tighten it. And then by knot of six, I reweave reality in accordance with my will and desire, tighten it. So knot of seven is the knot of contingency. And this is where I think something gets missed in a lot of spells. So by knot of seven, may the spell only be broken by this spoken phrase. Whatever it may be, you speak it into the knot and then tighten it. So if you cast this spell and for some reason it's not going your way, if for some reason you're not happy with the results, if someone else wants to break it, if
Mm.
they know your phrase, all it takes is to say it out loud and the spell is undone. And I've written that into the actual spell itself. We talk a lot about how there are many times spells can't be undone. And I will say there are a lot of times that if a spell is on a path towards its fruition and it causes some sort of havoc or damage along the way, you can't undo what's been done, but you can stop it from moving further.
Yes, I
So
agree. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like a
yes,
domino. The way I visualize it is like dominoes, where if you have them all set up one by one and you trickle it down, obviously you can't stop the dominoes from falling, but you can take out one domino so it doesn't continue on. Some of them have already
exactly.
fallen, but yeah.
And the knot of contingency allows you to build that into the spell. And I think this is a really wonderful, easy, it's a very, very all-purpose spell for people to do. And
Mm,
you'll actually find throughout this book, there are a lot of spells that if someone wanted to be a witch and just do one spell and one spell alone, this could be one of them.
yes.
It's the same way with the invocation of the witch's devil and the witch's queen in my first book, which is involving a petition to them and an invocation of them and to yourself to make this magic happen.
Yes.
I do feel like sometimes, listen, we get into a lot of online spaces and circles. People are like, do you have a spell for this? Do you have a spell for that? Do you have a spell for this? And I'm like, we as witches have a lot of power at our fingertips. We have a lot of ability to work with spirits. We have a lot of knowledge and gnosis. Well, we don't necessarily need 1,001 spells. Sometimes you need one good one, just one really good one.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I'm not saying that this book is just full of all nonsense and one good one because there's lots of good stuff in here.
There is.
I want people to have things that speak to them, and if the nine knot spell doesn't speak to you, that's okay. You can leave it behind. But I love it. I think it's really, really, really impactful. I think it's a beautiful story, and it really shows the story is cool because it actually shows the using and weaving of this spell.
Mm-hmm.
And in the grimoire section, it breaks it down with a page on how to weave a witch's cord. And then, of course, the actual spell broken down for you to do.
I loved the chord of contingency because I often work in stuff like that into my workings as well. And I think it's something
Hmm.
that's so often overlooked. So yeah, I really, really love that you wove that in. And now I just kind of want to talk about, I don't know how much you're willing to share with
Let's do
people.
it.
Okay. I really want to talk about it's the seven holy siblings, right? It's
Yes.
planetary energies. The ritual you have at the end of the book is
Yeah.
so badass. So you basically, it's supposed to take 7 weeks to perform, right? So
A
it's
minimum
seven.
7 weeks. So
Yeah,
you can of course put more weeks in between. I mean, we all got busy lives, right?
right.
So the whole point is there is a story in here called The Pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes at a time period when the Red Mother is moving on from one spot in the landscape and she is traveling the landscape. And in the process, she is expanding her craft. She's going on this journey. She's learning from the seven holy siblings, where in the map, you actually do get to see like where in the map of the landscape in the first book and in the chapter of the second book shows her path through this landscape. And
Mm-hmm.
she goes to the seven temples of the seven holy siblings, starting with Saturday of Saturn, which is interesting because that's the last day of the week when we think about Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Right.
So, because she goes through the process backwards, so does this ritual. And I call it the Red Week, 7 nights of celestial transvection.
Mm.
I think it's a really pretty
I do
piece of
too.
art.
It's
But
beautiful.
transvection is the act of,
Wait, hold
so,
on. The Zoom cut you out. It's an act of, and then it cut you out. Sorry, take it
sorry.
from there.
So transvection is an act of spirit flight.
Mm.
It's the concept of like flying to the witch's Sabbath. And so I've actually been working this ritual myself. I finished it. I've done it. It definitely took me more than 7 weeks to do because life got in the way.
Yeah, sure.
But the concept is to follow her path in the pilgrimage and go through the process of quieting your mind and going into a spirit flight, into a trance, and going through a path working of literally flying to the temple of Saturn, flying to the temple of Venus, flying through the temple of Jupiter, and then of course Mercury on Wednesday, and then Mars on Tuesday, the Moon on Monday, and the Sun on Sunday. The thing is that's backwards in a week, so you can't do it forward. You have to do it backwards. But of course, that's witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
It's always a little twisted, isn't it? So on the first week, you'd start with Saturday, you would do this flight, and the rite is really, really beautiful because I do write a really specific path working that involves you drop down from the night sky to fly to the ground, the wind hitting your skin. I want you to feel these things as you're going through them. You come
Yes.
across rocky formations and enter a cliffside mountainous landscapes. You follow the path to the Temple of Saturn with its shiny obsidian door. What do you see? What do you smell? Is it wet or dry? What is the temperature? What feelings do you have upon arrival? And it goes through this for every single day throughout the process, all the way to a point of flying back. And one of the biggest things that I think people get really confused with when it comes to spirit of flight or transvection is they think that s- people get really Hollywooded out about transvection and spirit flight. They really have this idea that it is going to you are leaving your body behind and going to trance. But I've never had it. I mean, I'm not going to say anyone else's experiences, what their experiences are, but um, it is a very exploratory thing in this trance-like state. Things come to you that you're not necessarily that you're not imagining. They're
Yeah.
popping up in your existence. So when I say things like you enter the temple, what does it look like inside? When you put your mind in the process of that trance to ask myself, what does it look like? You will be amazed at the things that start appearing before your eyes, that pop into your imagination, that spirit is putting inside of you so you know. What colors do you see, if any? Is the size difference on the inside and out? That was a big thing for me. I would notice I'd walk into a temple and the inside would be so much more grandiose than on the outside. I would notice the tiles, I'd notice the cracks. Colors would flood my vision, and I would have no idea why. I would approach Saturday. I would approach that sibling of the temple, the leader of the temple, and it would be like, what do you look like? What does their voice sound like? Are you hearing it? Is it in your head? What do you smell? What type of flora and fauna do you see around this landscape? These are all things that contribute to building a closer and more involved celestial craft. It's easy to get a collection of correspondences and a big book of correspondences about planets, about herbs and whatnot. But when you travel to the temple of Mercury in a spirit flight, and all of a sudden plants or vines or flowers or trees start popping up that you've never read about in any book. In fact, one of them popped up. I didn't know the name of it all. I had to look it up afterward until I found it. And it surprised me. I did never necessarily put that association with that planet, but now I do because I had this transvectional experience,
Mhm.
because I've traveled through trance to this temple. I spoke to this temple leader. I had these sort of weird spirit flight experiences that now inform me and make me closer to working with that temple, working with that planet, working with that celestial power. It's a really, really beautiful thing. And it definitely changed my practice when it comes to working with planetary magics, when it comes to working with these
Yeah.
seals.
Yeah.
Um, I now know if I want to create a devotional to Mars, I need to go to Trader Joe's and get a mini cactus. Like these are things that I not would have thought before, but
Sure.
that was my experience. One of the things that came through was that a offering in my home for a protection from Mars would be a mini cactus from Trader Joe. Not necessarily
I
from
can
Trader
see
Joe's,
that.
but
I
that's
can
where they
see
sell them, so that's where I'm going to get it. And I never would have probably read that in a book. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. Yeah. I love that this was a fresh, innovative take on building a relationship with the seven traditional planets.
Hmm.
I also love that you brought in spirit flight, of course, if we're talking about folkloric witchcraft. But I especially love that you started with Saturn because Saturn for me is very restrictive. It's about authority and structure and all of those more difficult themes for somebody to face. So I actually really liked that you started out with the Temple of Saturn and then worked your way all the way back to the sun because the sun is just, for me, this glorious, warm, fuzzy, gooey energy. And
Hmm.
I feel like if somebody were to start out with that, I think that their overall experience would have been a lot different. I much prefer starting with our relationship with discipline first and really assessing those boundaries so we can potentially break some boundaries or break some structures, then
Hmm.
moving on to other entities. So I really liked that you started with Saturn. I thought that was
Well,
great.
thank you. Well, I mean, without discipline, I don't think I could have done it.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
there were many weeks in between sometimes that I'm like, I've got to do it, I've got to do it, I've got to do it. And then something comes up and then I don't end up doing it.
Mm,
Sometimes it takes me as little as 15 minutes to do. Sometimes it's a whole half hour. I have actually been documenting some of my experiences, writing them down step by step after setting a recording. I set the recorder on my phones and I speak aloud what I am seeing and experiencing as
Right.
much as I can. And it is truly amazing when I go back and listen and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I forgot about that. One of the things when I was in the Temple of Jupiter is I was noticing these veins of gold all throughout. And then I realized it's not gold, it was actually pyrite,
Oh,
which completely changed my concept and idea. And there were just so many little experiences like that. When I had the experience with the Temple of the Moon, I actually now have a sub name for her as the Lady of Tears.
mm.
She's a collector of tears, and in my then this is getting into some serious UPG from this experience. Um, One of the things that I experience is that when we cry, she collects all of our tears. She disperses them back into the universe. She is not only the collector of tears, but she's part of this greater water expanse. And our emotions, our feelings, our tears of joy, our tears of sadness, they all come from and go to her. And it was something that I never would have come up on my own if I hadn't have done this. So that's why I know it comes from this outside influence and experience.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so, so beautiful. See, this is what I'm talking about with the innovation. I know I've said that a thousand times, but and this kind of brings me back to so ancient grimoires versus modern grimoires.
Yeah.
What do you think modern grimoires can offer that ancient grimoires can't? Because I have my opinions on this, but so I'm hoping that we can chat about it. Do you have any thoughts as to what, maybe even particularly your modern grimoire, what that can offer
Mhm.
that an ancient grimoire can't?
Well, I will say this just flat out, and I know some people have some strong opinions about this. They have hangups on it, and they have issues with people who have hangups on that. So I'm just going to put that out there in advance. You're not going to see anything Christian in my book. You're not going to see anything biblical. You're not going to see Psalms. You're not going to see any supplication. The closest thing you'll see to supplication is the idea of a spirit contract with the old ones.
Sure.
I don't think that's as much supplication as much as it is an opening of barriers and making a deal with the spirit of the crossroads.
Mm.
That's a little bit different, I think, than supplication and putting yourself below and instead of meeting in the middle. If that makes sense. I feel like there's a lot of supplication when it comes to ancient grimoires. There's a lot of heavy, heavy, heavy prayers that, of course, if you ask certain ceremonial magicians, will say these need to be memorized, and some say you can read out of the book, and some will say you have to say them for hours and hours and hours. In my opinion, that's beautiful. I love it for people who want to get into that, but it's just not me. And so, in a lot of modern grimoires like this one, you're going to get, as I said before, something that is much more tied with, and again, here we're going to get controversial terms, with low magic. I'm talking about earthly. I'm talking about cross or crossroads. I'm talking about river banks. I'm talking about graveyards. I'm talking about dirt. I'm talking about getting your hands dirty with witchcraft.
Yes.
I think that's one of the big differences in a lot of more ancient grimoires is it's not so much about major divine intercession as much as it is about working with the power of your animism and your local space.
Sure. Yeah, it's about practical magic rather than
Practical magic,
yeah,
yeah.
practical magic, less asceticism and spiritual enlightenment, and more so practical applications. That's
Yes.
definitely what I was seeing. And yeah, I agree. I mean, not only is it accessible with the use of ingredients and what you're actually doing in a ritual, it's inclusive. You're bringing in queer magic. So I think
Mhm.
that's revolutionary in itself. I also think modern grimoires really are able to integrate a lot of different perspectives like modern psychology, modern neuroscience, weaving in chaos magic elements, perhaps with belief used as a tool.
Mm.
And when people are writing these ancient grimoires, obviously it was a very much like you said before, a product of its time, a product of its culture, and information wasn't passed as readily and easily. And so people were often living in their own bubble when they were
Mhm.
writing these grimoires. There wasn't necessarily influences from other bubbles all over the world. world. And so now, I mean, we have the internet, obviously, and we're able to converse with other practitioners a lot more freely than people used to, because obviously the persecution was way worse than it is today, at least in the Western world. And I think that we have such a broader perspective on the world as to how different cultures have practiced potentially, as well as being able to read all these different grimoires and all these different perspectives and then bring it all together. Okay, what is the truth? What is the hidden truth among all these grimoires? Now that we have all these different perspectives, maybe we can hone it in and just have a lot broader perspective on just magic in general. So I think that's what modern grimoires can offer, is an updated look based on so much more cultural context than those ancient grimoires ever could have given. So that's my opinion on it. I mean, it's not just about accessibility, although I've been on a ancient grimoire kick lately. Like, I've been reading through the Greek magical papyri, and I'm just like, and I know that a lot of people recommend go get the Stephen Skinner's book to help you through the Greek magical papyri, but reading some of those rituals, I'm like, what am I reading? What am I doing here? It's just so foreign. And I don't
It's a lot of math.
it's a honestly, and it's so inaccessible. And I don't want to just say that inaccessible magic isn't good by any means. I feel like I'm
Mhm.
going to get so much hate for what I'm saying right now. There's going to be so many ceremonial people that are saying you don't know what the hell you're talking about, and that's fine. You know, perhaps I don't, but
And my hat's off for the people who resonate with it. It's
right,
okay. Thing is everything isn't for everyone. Just
exactly,
because I say something's not for me doesn't mean I'm putting it down. You're not putting it down just because
not at
it's not
all.
for you.
Right?
Because I totally see what you're saying here, and
Yeah,
I think, and I totally do, and I think a lot of people when they hear something like what we're talking about and they say like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, no, no, that's just it. I know what I don't know, and this is something that I don't understand that doesn't resonate with me. And
right.
that's okay. So that like working with the pick of tricks, there are some cool things in there. Like I like the idea of drawing a specific symbol slash picture at a certain planetary hour. Like
Sure.
I think that's a really cool thing. But there's a whole lot of math with a lot of with so much more that for me takes it way beyond my expansive understanding.
Hmm.
And for people who fit into that, good for you. That's amazing. I'm so glad you resonate with it. But that's okay that it's not for everyone. And I think that some people really, really start to feel like if I don't see myself included in everything, then then I'm going to disparage it hardcore. But
Right.
that's just it. Not everything is for everyone. I know my book won't be for everyone, and that's okay too.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's so important. I think also identifying someone's magical goals is important as well, because
Oh
if you
yeah.
really are looking for spiritual ascension and things like that, and looking at these ancient grimoires that are very religious or have a lot of religious components, maybe
Hmm.
that is something that's more important to you. Whereas if you're looking for practical magic, a very specific ritual, then, you know, perhaps go a different route. So, yeah, I think magical goals is really what it comes down to. It's not that one is better or worse. My point with this whole conversation is that I feel like the modern grimoires get so overlooked, and that's what I really wanted to speak on, you know, because ancient grimoires are fascinating and shrouded in mystery. I get it. It's cool. It's ambiguous. It's sexy.
Hmm.
But modern grimoires are just as good, if not better, for the right practitioner, the right, you know, the right goal.
Absolutely. And so many different things when it comes to occult literature have inspired me in different ways. And I think other
Mhm.
people will feel that, this book didn't speak to me, this book didn't speak to me, this book spoke to me. I even write about that in my introduction, and you said something just recently that I really loved when it talks about the mixture of practical magic, of psychology, of chaos magic.
Mhm.
There's a story in here called Weaving a Prophecy.
Oh,
And that one was one that I really enjoyed writing because it's a very, very simple act of weaving a narrative into a braid of threads. And the concept is you take on a specific day. So if you're working love magic on a Friday, if you're working protection magic on a Sunday, if you're working, wealth and monetary magic on a Thursday, and then these numbers that correspond, you use certain number of threads for the braids that correspond with those planets for the type of magic you're wanting to do. So,
yes.
you know, if I were working, say, just something simple like some protection, and it's a Sunday, and I'm doing a protection spell on a Sunday, and I'm taking a specific number of threads and I'm braiding them. And the thing is this is where we get in the mixture of chaos magic and psychology, right? So here we are, we're calling upon the power of the planets, we're using the number of the planetary threads, we're braiding it. And it's just weaving a simple narrative. I am protected from all that want to harm me. Nothing that wishes me malevolence can touch me. I will not trip over the pebble outside of my door like I did yesterday. I mean, like the thing is it's actually very, very simple. You're putting intention into thread and then you're tying it around your dominant wrist and then you're wearing it. And I think a lot of people don't understand necessarily how simple folk magic can be. They
Mm,
think it needs to be lots of many things and lots of intention, and all your intention is all that matters. And I'm like, well, hold on. That I see where that comes from, but there is also an aspect of putting an intention into a simple thread and then having that reminder of it around you at all times that what your goals are.
yeah.
Having a reminder about what steps in my life am I taking to make sure that I meet my goal at my goal's end, if that makes sense. Um,
It
I
does.
think that there is definitely a big crossover there of magic and of psychology. And I think one of the great things about this story is that it shows that traditionally in the past, because these people would go to the Red Mother on her house on the hilltop and they would bring her their woes, and sometimes all she really was doing was counseling them. And I think that that's one of the big things that people forget about the cunning folk of yesteryear, if you will.
Sure.
Sometimes that's just what a witch or a magical practitioner ended up doing. They ended up being a little bit of a counselor, helping people with their problems that maybe their clergy or their neighbor or their family couldn't help them with. Maybe it was something they couldn't bring to these people. They needed to bring it to someone who was a little bit more clandestine or lived on the edge. And sometimes magic was involved, sometimes a little charm was involved, sometimes a tonic or an iron nail or some red thread tied into a braid and wrapped around your wrist. I wanted to make sure that the people were reminded of just how simple not only magic was, but sometimes what the purpose of the local witch was, the local cunning person. It wasn't always just for magic. Sometimes it was for help in other everyday life things.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too, with your grimoire, your modern, I'm going to continue calling it a modern grimoire because that's very much what it is for me. How do you see this fitting in as far as how do you see your own grimoire contributing to the tradition of folkloric witchcraft 5, 10 years, 50 years down the road? Do you have a hope for this? I see it going a certain way. I see this as history in the making. I really do. I think this is going to be something that people look at 50 years into the future and go, holy shit, look at this ancient grimoire. Look at this, you know what I mean? Speaking of ancient grimoires.
Yeah.
So, do you have a vision for that? How do you think it's going to, I don't know, fall in the community?
I mean, I would truly hope that it's something that stands the test of time. I
Yeah.
would truly hope that people look back and go, and that's actually one of the reasons why those author's notes were so important to me, because it adds context to the time period of this magic being written, that these stories were being written. A lot of times people, like we talked about, they didn't consider the context of like 1500s or 1600s when the Lesser or Greater Key of Solomon was being written. They
Mhm.
didn't consider that the black pullet was so popular only because the printing press boomed at the time. They didn't consider the political implications of how during this Bibliothèque Bleue period of the French grimoires, uh, the printing press was booming, but a lot of the powers that be really wanted to put a kibosh on it. They wanted to shut it down. They started to have selling them in different book jackets. So when you start knowing about that context, it really starts to make you understand the flavor of what you're reading and why it exists. I hope that these books not only stand the test of time, I hope that as these stories are written, they continue to inspire people. I hope that the egregore, the archetype, the spirit of the Red Mother becomes more pervasive. Um, I hope that my concept of the old ones, because I do go a lot deeper in this book, and my concept of the old ones, the idea of absence, existence, desire, and physicality, making up these ancient beings, these archetypes, these spirits that are so much more than in my opinion, they call them deified, call them, it doesn't really matter. That I think that they're kind of beyond our words. They've been dwindled down in my language to a point where they are major presences that infect and effect everything that exists.
Yes.
And I hope that they stay with people. I hope they inspire people. I hope in 100 years from now, it'll be a collectible, like maybe it'll be, maybe
Yes.
after the copyright's done, all of a sudden, book publishers will want to republish it and put out a box set. Who knows? Maybe I'll do that in my lifetime. I think that would be really cool. And I do really, really, really hope that people feel moved because for me, witchcraft is so deeply tied with my emotions, my experience, my passion. And these stories move me and I want people, like you said, they give you a sense of deliverance. And I
Yes.
want people to feel as witches, as occultists, as magical practitioners. I want you to feel delivered when you finish it.
Oh my gosh, yes. And that was okay. So you I know we're trying to wrap it up here, but there you brought up something else for me too. That's really at the root of what witchcraft is because witchcraft is very ecstatic and free flowing
Hmm.
versus and it's very emotional for me too. It's so emotional. Whereas if you look at a lot of different ceremonial traditions, some may not incorporate and value the emotional aspect of it as much. It's a lot more perhaps intellectual and scholarly, not
Very
necessarily.
strategic.
Right, is strategic, I guess is the appropriate word. And I don't want to put a blanket statement because there are some ceremonial magicians that do bring in a lot of emotion and maybe some shape-shifting aspects into their practice and other things. But for witchcraft specifically, it feels very emotional for me. And when we're talking about deliverance and we're talking about the history of witchcraft and being persecuted, being rebellious, being political, being all of these things, there's this element of like catharsis, I feel. And so your book just totally represented all of that. It was just, yeah, so relatable. So I definitely see it standing the test of time for sure. I see this.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I know. It's so good. And I know that 50 years from now, like this is going to be a collectible. Like I need to get my hands on the color copy because I want the first edition and you need to sign it for me, obviously. Like
Yes.
I want the first edition. And I can say that I knew you at some point, I knew Marshall, no big deal, but I mean, after we're both long gone, it probably doesn't matter anyway, but I'm just saying that I think your book is really valuable to the community. So thank you for your work in writing it.
Thank you so much. That means the world to me.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for coming on the channel today and talking about ancient grimoires, modern grimoires, and your own. And this is just really exciting to see you blossom because when we first collaborated, I mean, you had just wrote your very first book, Cutting Words, and now here you are. And I feel like I'm witnessing you grow, and it's just so cool to see. I'm just enamored. I'm so happy for you, and thank you for coming on the channel and all that. So I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I love coming on your show. I think what you're putting out into the world is so important. It's
Oh,
very,
thank
very
you.
clear with the way that people respond to you. I read a bunch of your comments. I've seen the
Oh,
history of our videos.
don't
I've
do
done some of
that.
those.
No.
No, I have. I've done some of the some of the collaborations with you as well, and our big discussions about so many different things. Um, I think what we're putting out is something that is building a community. And to be perfectly honest, I think community is something we deeply, deeply need right now.
Yes, yes, I couldn't agree more. All right, well, thank you everybody for watching this video. I will have all of Marshall's stuff linked in the description box below. As always, appreciate you. I will see you all in another video soon. Bye, everyone.